Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Today's webinar is with Rabbi Dr. Donniel Hartman, president of the Hartman Institute, someone who I think most everybody watching does not need an introduction, but we will be starting in about a minute. The title of tonight's program is What Do Israelis Feel About World Jewry and How Can It Change? And this is part of our ongoing series of Israel at 70. As you know, Israel's 70th Independence Day is about 10 days from now. In fact, tonight is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day here in Israel, and it's what Donniel, in fact, has called the High Holidays of Israel. So it's a very intense and important week here, and we're going to go straight into Donniel's talk. All I want you to know is that we have many questions that have already been sent in to us from our viewers, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And if there are any questions that come up during the talk, you're welcome to send them to us on our Facebook feed, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. So without further ado, Donniel Hartman.
Thank you, Alan, and hello, everyone. Very nice to see you. I like the idea that there's questions even before I said anything. That's that gives a new meaning to the idea of I have an answer, what's your question? You have a question before you even heard what I had to say. The issue of what Israelis think about world Jewry is an issue that has it's been a constant issue since the beginning of the State of Israel, but over the last year has been sitting heavy on the soul of many of us. And part of what we've come to understand is that while we've been thinking and trying to engage in ways in which world Jewry could rethink its relationship with Israel, but if Israel doesn't rethink its relationship with world Jewry, everything, all the bridges that we try to build, will basically be irrelevant. Because if you have a world Jewry which is open to a relationship, but Israelis, if world Jewry does not feel that Israelis see them, care about them, think about them, have any space for them within the Zionist narrative and within the State of Israel, then no matter how excited or open or successful educational programs will be, they will ultimately fail. And if the project of the Jewish people today is not simply a project of Israel or Zionism, but it's a project of how do we, this 14.5 million people, continue to walk together, to be together, to see ourselves as a collective. The issue of the relationship of world Jewry to Israel, but today the relationship of Israel to world Jewry, is a critical feature that we can't just leave on the bookshelves. We have to begin to think about it, understand it, and also begin to do something about it. And that's what I would like to talk about today. From the outset, there's one thing that I believe needs to be, I think is self-evident. And it is counterintuitive in light of some of the things that Israelis are doing. But Israelis see Israel and Zionism as a project of the Jewish people. There is no Israel. Israel at its core is the state which belongs to the Jewish people. This is the way the Declaration of Independence starts. It starts with that in the land of Israel, this is where the Jewish people were founded. In the 10th paragraph, which moves to the right to sovereignty, the right of the state of Israel to be is based on the right of the Jewish people to sovereignty like all other people. So when you speak about Zionism, you speak about the homeland of the Jewish people. Jewish peoplehood is an integral part to the way Zionists see this whole enterprise. Now, it's almost self-evident because we recreated something. While we might have returned to our homeland, we were not a nation state living in this space continuously for 2,000-3,000 years. We have ancestral claims here. We see ourselves as a nation, but we were disconnected from the land. And so when we returned to the land, we were returning on the basis of the rights of a people, not of the rights of this nation state. But here it starts to get complicated. While Israelis and Zionism and Israeli thought is deeply connected to the idea of Jewish peoplehood, the way they express that connection since the formation of the state, and in many ways since Balfour, is profoundly problematic, in particular for North American Jews. For Israelis, Israel is connected to world Jewry, or its expression, the expression of its connection to world Jewry, is in primarily two different areas. The first, and in many ways the most remarkable, is through the law of return, where Israelis state in the law of the country and in the determining of who is a citizen or not a citizen of this country, that this country does not belong to the Israelis who live here alone, but rather every single Jew, and by Jew, the broadest sense of the term, which follows the Nuremberg laws, anybody who Hitler would have thought as a Jew or killed as a Jew, anybody, any Jew has a right to citizenship in this country, whenever you want, at any time. That means I live here in this country. I will go through the difficult processes, the difficult times. I will take care of this country. I will build it. I will nurture it. And you get to come whenever you want. Even if beforehand you weren't carrying your share. I carry the share. I lived in Israel when the state was in immediate, constant danger. I lived in the state of Israel when there was a complete disparity between our power and other people's power. I lived in the state of Israel when Israel was a primitive country. Now you want to come because you like our health care, because we have better health care than you, because you have a better chance of employment, because education is cheaper, day schools are cheaper. Because Israel is now, this year, we went down a little bit, the 11th happiest place in the world to be. We were 7th. United States, I forget what Canada is. United States is 17th. Or you want to come here now because it's good here? No problem. Come. I don't care when you come. I don't care why you come. As Ben-Gurion states in the Knesset when he put forth the law of return, he says, I'm not showing preference to Jews in the law of return. It's not that I am distributing citizenship to a particular group that I'm giving, that I'm separating from the rest of the world, as if I'm discriminating from other people. In his understanding, when we accept Jews in Israel, we're not granting them citizenship. We are recognizing their citizenship, which exists prior to the state, and even prior to our formal acceptance. So this first idea of Jewish people in Israel is that this country belongs to any Jew who wants to move here, and at any time. And it's the reverse of the joke. I think it was in the 60s or 70s. Will the last person please shut off the light? Here it is. I'll keep the light on. I'm here. No one's shutting off the light. I will keep it on when you want to come. And then it will be your home. This is a profound statement of loyalty to Jewish people. We'll see in a moment why it is so problematic. But there's almost no nation state in the world which will say, you haven't been here for 2,000, I haven't even seen you for 2,000 years. The minute you show up and say, I want to come home, I say, well, come on in. I don't care how many. There's 3 million Jews, there's 1 million of you, come on in. In the United States, what would it be? The equivalent of, 30, 60 million, 80 million people showing up and saying, hi. No problem. Now, it does sometimes create a problem. Israelis always love Aliyah better than they love Olim. That's the idea. But that's just human. The fact that we're not perfect is not the point. But that's one central avenue for expressing Israeli Jews' commitment to world Jewry. The second, and by the way, I remember when I made Aliyah in the 70s, and then it was a notion that North American Jews, our life is so easy, and we come to Israel, we get a Volvo, and all. With all the kvetching, they still accepted us. Still accepted us. The second fundamental expression of Israeli loyalty to Jewish peoplehood is the Israeli notion that the benefits of Israel don't belong to Israelis alone. The dividends of sovereignty, they are willing to share it with world Jewry, in particular Jewish power. Our power is something that we are willing to expend, whether it's military, whether it's political, whether it is economic. We are willing to expend whatever power we have, and the more we have, the more we're willing to expend, for the sake of the Jewish people, wherever they may be. And every year when the chief of staff of the Israeli army goes and shows up in the March of the Living and stands before Auschwitz, he changes the name, or he interprets Tzahal, Tzva Haganah Yisrael. The Israeli Defense Force is ultimately reinterpreted as Tzva Haganah La'am HaYehudi. It's the JDF, it's not the IDF, it's the JDF, it's the Jewish People's Defense Force. We're there for you. I don't care if you need me, I am yours. I'm there with you. If you're in trouble, I don't sleep. Both by keeping Israel as a place that all Jews could move to whenever they want under no condition, with no preconditions. And the notion that the power of Israel is at the disposal of Jews wherever they may be are two key factors of the of this state's commitment to Jewish people. And it's so interesting how so often when Israel is engaged in tikkun olam, and it sends immediately, it's when there's an earthquake or a disaster, and it sends its forces, the first things that they do are there any Jews there? And I know there's something a little disparate here. Here we're in the midst of our engaging in tikkun olam. Our first ask is, are there Jews? And that's where we send them, and we go and we see, could we rescue or we not rescue? You're my people. And I owe you, and you can count on me. The deep challenge to this commitment starts with, or the difficulty inherent within the limitations of this commitment, start with understanding a core belief of Zionism, which starts really in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And that is the Zionist belief that the only place that Jewish life is viable, whether spiritually or literally physically, is in the state of Israel. The only place that a Jew could be safe, where Judaism could be safe, where Judaism could have a renaissance, where the Jewish people could flower, is in the state of Israel. Zionism begins with Shlilat HaGolah. Zionism begins with denial of the possibility of Jewish life outside of Israel. That's where it begins. Now, that's a very coherent belief at the beginning of the 20th century. Most Jews, by the way, rejected Zionism. Zionism was a very small, really, it was only moved a small section of the Jewish community. The vast majority of Jews says, no, I don't deny the possibility of my life here. If I'm living in America, or I'm living in England, or in France, or Germany, or wherever it might be, my life here is just fine. It was the Zionists who came and said, no, you don't realize there is no future. You don't have a future. Deep in the 100-year-old ideology of Zionism is the notion that in the 20th century there are two key moments. One is called Shoah, and the other one is called Tkuma. And whether that Shoah was a pogrom or ultimately leads to the ultimate Shoah of the Holocaust, diaspora is where Shoah takes place. And in the Zionist narrative, there's only one possible Tkuma, and that is in the state of Israel. There's only one place where Jews could be reborn, where there will be a rebirth of Judaism and the Jewish people. Now, with this, we could understand the limitations of their commitment to Jewish peoplehood. When they see world Jewry, from a Zionist narrative, they see a Jew at risk. That's the category. I see a Jew who basically is in an unsustainable reality. And therefore, I say to them, I care for you. How am I? Come. Come. I'm waiting for you. Come. Where you are is going to you're on quicksand. It's going to disappear. Where you are, you're in danger. Whatever I can, I'll do to protect you. But I don't see you. What Zionism never saw is that there were, in the 20th century, two fundamental tkumot. There was one Shoah and an ongoing 2,000 year of suffering, and then in the 20th century there were two rebirths. One which took place in the context of Israel, and one which took place in the context of North America. Both of them were a response to the precursors of the Shoah or the anti-Semitism of Europe, which ultimately leads to the Holocaust. They don't see that there was a second rebirth, and I'm going to come back to that in a few moments. And consequently, when they ask, how do I care about you? Come! How else am I supposed to care about you? What else do you want me to see? Israelis have no language with which to see world Jewry outside of the parameters of Shoah, which were Remembrance Days today. Outside of Israel is where Shoah took place and where Shoah will inevitably take place. And whether it is a big Shoah or a little Shoah, the Shoah of anti-Semitism or the Shoah of assimilation. And in Israeli news, world Jewry becomes part of the front page news. Whenever there's an anti-Semitic event, we count every anti-Semitic event and report it on page 1. Every small little swastika, and how many swastikas more were there this year than last year? The average Israeli is on top of every one of those features. Every one of those statistics. We know exactly how many Jews are intermarrying. Front page news. And so when these are our narratives, what else do you want from me? Of course I love you. Of course I care about you. Come. The problem is, how do Israelis relate to somebody who doesn't want either of the two gifts of peoplehood that Israelis want to distribute? What happens when there's a group of Jews who don't want to make Aliyah? What happens when there's a group of Jews who don't need Israel's power? Principally Jews of North America. There might be a number of other countries, not many, maybe Britain. Depends who's in power. Israelis have no problem with Jews from the former Soviet Union and France. That's exactly. But when they see North America, they're still seeing you through 19th, early 20th century lenses, and they don't have another narrative. And that's why, so many people I remember complained, why didn't Netanyahu attack anti-Semitism in Charlottesville? Why didn't he condemn it immediately? And people thought it only had to do with his relationship with Trump. That's part of it. But it was much deeper. Because when Israelis hear of anti-Semitism outside of Israel, that's normal. What did you think you're supposed to have outside? I'm supposed to condemn That's what this is. Of course, my solution is move. What do you think I'm supposed to create for you, an anti-Semitic universe outside of? That's what Israel is, the only solution. And so, at the beginning, there is a fundamental disconnect. Because Israelis see you as Shoah, and world Jewry is increasingly seeing itself as Tkuma. Israelis see you as Jews at risk, and world Jewry sees itself as equal partners, or world Jewry, particularly in North America, see themselves as equal partners, as having a competing narrative for the rebirth of the Jewish people. And I'll come back to this competing narrative in a moment. So where do we go? If Israel, it's not that Israeli Jewry doesn't see you It's what they see is not what you see. They have a narrative of you which doesn't fit who you are. And fundamentally, we don't have any therapist who's going to sit us all down and say, oh, you're not hearing me. You speak, let me share you my feelings, you'll tell me your feelings. That's just not, it's, are we destined to a divorce? Let's go back for a moment into the core aspiration of Zionists in Israel. Their narrative is that Israel is the home of the Jewish people. It's your home. It's the only home that's safe. It's the only home that's going to be good for you. Come home. And the notion is that a people has a home. Every people, just like a family, should live in their home. A family lives at home. A people should live in their national homeland. And the idea is that a people actually has one home. A family has one home. That's the core Zionist narrative. If this is the home, then everybody belongs here. And I'm keeping your room ready for you. The problem is that there's a fundamental mistake which Zionism is making. And that is the notion that a family has one home. Let's play with this narrative of Israel as home. In reality, most families don't have one home. Most families have multiple homes. I have children and grandchildren, married children, single children. My small nuclear family actually has 3 homes and a room, and a rented room in Tel Aviv. All of them are part of my family's home. The notion that the whole family should live in one home, that actually only applies when their people are little. Which notion is that your adult children should move home? I don't want you to live home. I want you to go. They don't want to be at home, and in a certain sense, you also don't want them to be at home. The notion that a family has a home is actually profoundly inaccurate. A family has multiple homes, in which very often the different members of the family have a home that is their principal home, but there is a fascinating web in the relationship between the different members of the family and the homes of the other members. So, for example, Jerusalem is relatively small. I have a key to my kids' homes, and they have a key to my home. We have each other's keys. But the nature of using those keys is very interesting. My key to their home is principally for when they lose their key. My key that they have is to be able to come home whenever they want to. And even though I might complain from time to time, the reality is actually I don't complain because I love it. But let's say we might complain. We really don't. I want you to use it as often as possible. Please, come unannounced, because our great fear is that as our children will grow older, they'll ignore us and we'll disappear. If I'm in there, I want to continue to be here. What do you want? You have my key. Great, come home. When I don't go to my kids' home uninvited, almost never. Sometimes I could go, a few times. But basically, I never come uninvited. They do come uninvited. But when I do sit in my kids' home after being invited, I'm not sitting in a stranger's home. I'm not sitting in, okay, I have my home on Shimshon 17. Somebody else, you have your home. No. When I sit there, I'm not like sitting I'm not a guest. I'm sitting in their home. I feel actually really comfortable. I could go to the refrigerator, get something to drink. But it's interesting, my use of their refrigerator and their use of my refrigerator is very, very different. They could come and go to the refrigerator and eat whatever it is they want, regardless. They don't ask, oh, do you need this? I would never, if I'm looking and taking something, I would only eat something. It's a different dynamic. I'm the parent, they're the child. Part of what they're looking for when they're coming to home is, does this home, I don't bring the same needs to their home that they bring to my home. In this larger family home, when I go to their home, I want to feel welcome. I want to be actually in their home, seeing them in their home, seeing my children. but I'm sitting on the couch and I'm comfortable. I feel at home, but I know I'm in someone else's home. When my children come to my home, they want to know that they still symbolically have a place here. They want to know, and many of you had this experience, what happens when a kid moves and you actually want to change the decorations of that room? What are you doing to my room? You're not even living here. My room. My daughter now lives in Tel Aviv. My son is sleeping in our house now. He's sleeping in her room, and she comes home. Well, why are you in my? It's not your room. What does it mean? What? No. Try changing around the furniture. Emptying a closet. Part of what my children look for, even though they have their own homes, is they want a closet, they want to store stuff, they want to use they want to use the refrigerator. They want a shelf. They want to know, it's not exactly like marking territory, but they want to know, is this symbolically, am I still here? Is it still mine? In some sense, even though they know it's not theirs because they have another home. Play with this category of home. What does it mean for a family to realize that we don't have one home? And one of the fundamental flaws of Zionism is that it believes that the Jewish people have one home. We might have one national homeland. We might have only one home in which the sovereign Jewish people express themselves, or which the Jewish people's right to sovereignty expresses itself. But as a people, the national identity does not exhaust our people. We have multiple homes. Precisely because Zionism doesn't think that your home is a viable home. They think that their home is the refuge. You're like a little child. You have nowhere else to sleep. You're going to be homeless without Israel. But what happens if you're not homeless? What happens if you actually grew up? Now, we might have a national home. But it doesn't mean we have only one home. Now, it's perfectly legitimate, and I would welcome a competition in the Jewish world. Who's the parent and who's the child? Are Israelis the parent? Are North American Jews the parent? Which child rebelled and left? In the Zionist narrative, actually, they're the ones who rebelled against their parents, who didn't know what they knew and ultimately suffered in the Holocaust and built a new home. So I'm not sure that Zionism is the parents. Historically, it's not. But it's perfectly legitimate, and it would be a wonderful competition for Israeli Jews and world Jewry to each one compete. Who has the better home? Whose home is more secure? Whose home gives better hope for the future of Jewish people? What a great competition. From that competition, we'll all win. And I don't know in my analogy of this home who is the parent, but I do know that Zionism will always believe in a deep sense that it is the parent. And it's perfectly legitimate for Israeli Jews and world Jewry to each believe that their home is nicer. That their home is nicer. That their home is better. But there's a difference between believing that your home is better and believing that your home is the only home that everybody should move into. There's actually interesting limitations when you think about it, of a family with multiple homes, besides the refrigerators and who uses the keys and how do you sit. One of the key features, as I said beforehand, is that symbolically, there's some way to symbolically express the fact that when you're in one of your family's multiple homes, you have a place there. You could store stuff, the way you sit, the way you use the refrigerator. But there's also limits on what you could do. No matter what, my kids who have the key to my house don't come into my house and move around the furniture. Oh, Abba and Mommy, we hated your furniture, we bought new furniture. They also don't take my furniture. They can eat in the refrigerator, they don't take out my couch, I hope. They also don't take out a mortgage on my home. I might have to pay the mortgage on their home, but that has to do more with Israeli economics than with the actual definition of a family in multiple homes. But you don't just come into my house and say, hi, I'm calling from the house. Yes, please, I'd like to take out a mortgage. You get to be in the home and to feel at home even though it's not yours in the full sense. But you don't get to shape. There's certain rules and things you don't do. I don't go into my child's home and say, oh, it smells here. Ugh, it stinks. My kids don't come into my house and say, ugh, mommy and Abba. They do a little bit, but it's all, don't come. There's a certain level. You don't get to dump on each other. When you're in someone's home, even though you're family, you don't, it's not, when it's your home, you go to the bathroom without shutting the door. When you're in someone else's home, you don't go to the bathroom without shutting the door. I mean bathroom symbolically and everything that you do therein. Your imagination will suffice. Part of what Israelis feel, and here I want to move one step forward, just like my kids don't come into my house and take out a mortgage, they don't move around the furniture, they don't do a remodeling. Remodeling is the hands of the person who it's their primary home. Israelis very often are very worried that world Jewry wants to remodel the house. They don't feel that that's your job. The borders of the country, when our kids go to war, that you could decide the borders of your house. You don't decide the border, even though it's the family home. You don't decide the borders. Israelis also often feel, and they're not aware of when they do it, because nobody is ever, we're never as aware of what we do to others as what others do to us. So while Israelis are profoundly critical of everything that you do, because you basically are Shoah, your death or imminent death, and what does that mean about the world that you've created? When you criticize Israel, you're like you're coming into my house and you're dumping on me. How do we create a language of a family with multiple homes? The first thing that I want to do is I want to put that question in front of you. And I'm playing with that and I'm thinking about it. Who's the parent? Who's the child? What is the etiquette of multiple homes? I am certain that Israelis don't have that etiquette because they don't believe there's multiple homes. And also, when they believe that they're the only home, anytime you criticize, you're criticizing the only home, which is your own lifeline. They don't even have a language who are you to criticize? I've created tkuma, I've created rebirth, don't you understand? Come here, and then you can criticize as an insider, and we are profoundly critical of each other. But from the outside, you haven't earned that right. Where do we go from here? So number one, the first place to go is we need to start thinking about what are the narratives, what is the language that we have for these multiple spaces that we live in. The most open-minded of Israelis like to use the narrative of you are shareholders who hold, what do you do with a share? You hold a right to purchase it. What's it called?
Oh, a warrant.
No.
Oh.
One of you answer.
Okay.
You have you know what I mean. I forget the technical term. And where you have a right, it's like you're in a company and you have a right to buy shares. Oh, I'm so open to world Jewry. Like you have your shareholders in potential. Israelis don't realize how narrow-minded Zionism is, not in its love for you, but in its ability to see you. And as very often is the case when enlightened people are enlightened, their whole horizon, or where they think they're enlightened, their whole horizon is filled by their enlightenment. Zionism is the Jewish people's enlightenment in their mind, and they don't see you. So what needs to change? First, in this case, the primary thing that needs to change is not in your hands. The primary thing that needs to change is we have to change a 100-year-old Zionist narrative. And it's so deep, so deep. How do we create a language for Israelis to even begin to recognize that you're not children and that we actually have that we could have multiple homes? Love your home, think your home's better, but that there's another home. We have the national homeland. That's correct. We own that one. There isn't neither in Uganda or now in Uganda we actually are going to be sending a lot of Israelis. We might have a second home in Uganda. We have the national home, but you also have a home. To begin to think in those terms. Now here, it's really important. We always look for very short-term solutions for serious problems. And why not? If there is a short-term solution to a serious problem, why wouldn't I want it? I just personally live by the famous philosopher, Private Benjamin, when Goldie Hawn said, anytime someone promises you the world for 10 cents, chances are you're getting something that's not worth a dime. Anytime there's a serious problem and someone has a short-term solution for it, I don't buy it. This is a 100-year-old problem. And no little reversed birthright type move is going to make Israelis, I see. I'm going to go for 7 days or 8 days. Half the time I'm going to be shopping. The other third of the time I'm going to be at a sports event because we have to make the trip worthwhile. And I'll go to a few different shuls and this, and I'll meet and talk. Great. And I'll even be profoundly engaged. But at the end of the day, when I go home, if I don't have a language with which to interpret my experience, at the end, for Israelis, there still is Aretz, and where you live is Chutz La'aretz. It's outside of Israel. You make aliyah and you make yeridah. Until we don't change some of that language, no short-term little trips are going to change. It involves Zionism starting to look at itself and recognize that there's other possibilities without getting into whether there is anti-Semitism or whether there is assimilation. Prior to that, how exclusive does Zionism have to perceive the language of Tkuma as belonging only to itself? In many ways, just like the Hartman Institute has been involved for the last 10 years or so with an eye engage of world Jewry vis-a-vis the state of Israel, we have now begun, just like that, a research which will ultimately enter into very, very extensive educational programs. We're starting to create an eye engage for Israelis regarding world Jewry. How do we create a narrative for Israelis to begin to see you, which does not involve the fact that you are in Shoah? How much of a sense of tkuma does Zionism have to hold while still allowing some form of rebirth outside of Israel? That's the question. And we're looking into old sources, new sources. How do we engage in that conversation? And part of and I feel bad about this, but I'm with you in this. Part of it is that you're going to have to wait. Because in a certain sense, until Israelis change, disrespect is going to be integral to the Zionist narrative. And it's not this government or that government. It was so easy when it came to the Kotel, and it was so interesting to see the way Haredi Jewry uses secular Zionist narratives. Haredi Jewry, which does not see Israel as Tkuma, used language that world Jewry is Shoah. I loved it. It was just, I couldn't have made it, you couldn't have scripted it. There was like talk about macabre bizarre. How Haredi Jewry says, what do you want? Why should I care about North America? Look at their assimilation. They're giving the Zionist narrative that the only place to live is in Israel. It was just beyond bizarre. And the minute they were, why do I have to worry about world Jewry? They're going to disappear anyway. That's what we have to change. And that's a work that Israelis have to go through. What do you have to do? Truth is, I'm not sure. Part of me believes that I hope that you'll stick around long enough. But how do you begin to develop an etiquette of multiple homes also? What does that etiquette look like? How do you educate to Israel as a home, even though your principal home is outside? How do you maintain that? What does that mean? Israelis have to understand that as home, they need to create symbolic expressions. That's why I was so upset at the Kotel, because the Kotel, it's not that world Jewry needs the Kotel to do a bar mitzvah. And you don't need Israel to give you recognition. You don't need it. What do you think, Israel? Who's Israel to give you recognition? You need a sense that it's yours too. How does Israel create those symbolic relationships with you, in which allow for you to feel at home outside of Aliyah? But how do you create and foster within your communities a language of home? How do you foster also, and here I'm sharing questions, and I believe that I have to put questions out, and I don't know exactly what needs to be done. I know that if world Jewry does not engage also in criticism of Israel, when you get rid of criticism, you have indifference. Criticism is part of a relationship. But what does it mean to know and to recognize that Israel is a country, a democratic country with its own government? What are the boundaries? What are the boundaries of the conversation? When is it going too far? I always love, and here I'll end, and then we'll go to maybe some new and old questions, and we'll see which questions knew what I was going to talk about in advance. And Sidney Morgenbesser, one of the most famous philosophers in the 20th century, was at a philosophy conference in the Institute in the 80s when there was an intifada. And he said as follows, I think that Israel has to leave the West Bank. And this was pre-Oslo, and people jumped on him. How dare you tell us what to do? Your kid's life is not on the line. And Sidney Morgenbesser, who had a very particular style, says, excuse me, I apologize, I just don't think you understood what I said. I said, I think Israel should leave the West Bank. I was telling you what I think. I wasn't telling you what to do. An Israel that doesn't want to hear what world Jewry thinks, and a world Jewry that wants to tell Israel what to do, are people who not only have different narratives with each other, even when they happen to talk, aren't living by the etiquette of the multiple homes. I could go into my child's home and I could talk to them about their life. I'm not telling them what to do. They're grown up. I don't tell you what to do. But the fact that I could tell you what I think, as long as you know that I understand that I'm not taking away from you your choices. These are the types of questions that I believe we need to work on. Because what we have to understand is that when world Jewry, or Jews of America post-Holocaust, did not feel safe, the idea that Israel was not a homeland, but was the safe home to run to, created that connection. How do we create a sense of home with Israel in which it's not the place that you want to go to in a time of crisis? It's one of your family's homes. What does that mean? How do you express it? What do you have to know? What do you think about? How do you make distinctions between telling what you think and telling what to do? When are there moments when you say, I'm not being welcomed here? How do you protest? How do you engage? What is the nature of this? Israel is your home, but it's not your principal home. You are a guest, but not a guest. We are a guest at each other's homes, but not guests at the same time. There are multiple narratives that we're trying to create to make sense of our relationship with each other. Today I wanted to put down both an analysis of the problem and the idea of a family with multiple homes, and invite you, as I'm inviting myself and my team here, to begin to think about what are the new rules? What's the etiquette? How do we understand? How do we create a family with multiple homes? Because ultimately that's what we are. Our challenge as we're now celebrating, about to celebrate Israel's 70th birthday, how do we engage in this together? How does Zionism in your lives, which does not mean moving to Israel, and it's not just support of Israel, it has to be much deeper. What Zionism is the belief that Israel is a home. And what does that mean? What do you need from Israelis? And what do you need to do in order to sustain that narrative? That, as we celebrate 70 years, is, I believe, the central challenge over the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Donniel. And we have some questions now. In fact, it does look as if some of the people who wrote to us in advance knew what you were going to say. So
I don't know how that makes me feel. Like, have I become that predictable?
You're not predictable, but there are people who feel that they have a sense of your thinking. So here's a very short question, and maybe you can even take issue with the premise of it. It's from Rabbi Lawrence Englander in Toronto, and he says, how can diaspora Jews begin to think like Israelis?
You shouldn't. I think the old narrative was that there's the right way to think, and that's in Israel, and the more Zionism is thinking like Israelis. Don't think like an Israeli. Think like a Canadian. Don't think like Israelis, think about Israelis. Think about this home, and the home that you're not in. The home that you might not want to be in. That you might even think your home is better. So I don't know if you should think like Israelis. I think our challenge is to think about each other in a different way. And by the way, one of the great things of this medium is you get to ask a question, I get to give the answer.
All right then. So, Rabbi,
I hope I understood you correctly.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll hear from people if they didn't get their questions answered, and we encourage you to continue to write to us. Rabbi Alberto Zelakovich from Fair Lawn, New Jersey. He said, and there's a premise in this question, you may even want to take issue with the premise, but he says, how does the fact that American Jews are losing the national component of their Jewish identity impact their relationship with Israel?
Right. That's a tough one. And none of us know the answer to that. Actually, we know that it's a problem. The question is not how does it impact, is there anything we can do to reverse that impact? One of the interesting questions, and this is being debated, how much denationalization is going on? Not de-Zionification, but denationalization. Decommunalization of Jewish life is taking place. Are people becoming less communal, or are they seeing peoplehood in different terms? I don't know if we have a full answer to that. Just like we have one type of we have social media creates friends. I don't know if the Jew within is a Jew without community, or is it a Jew who defines community differently and doesn't use communal institutions in the same way. Part of this is we have to talk a lot about this, and we have to try to figure it out, especially for a religion which sees collective identity as a critical part of who it is. And if Judaism becomes a Judaism without a collective identity, is it still Judaism? But I would respond for your reflection, and I appreciate it, and right from the beginning, it's one of those cases where I'm saying a big part of what you're asking, I don't have an answer, and it goes way beyond the parameters of today's conversation. But I've been thinking a lot about this. It used to be when you could tell Jews you have to. You have to do this, you have to do that. When you say you have to, today a counter-argument is, no, I don't think so. What do you mean? Jews for 3,000 years? No. You don't get to tell anybody you have to. The only parts that are going to be kept are not those which we define as you have tos, but the ones which have compelling meaning, which earn loyalty. That's the deep meaning, as we all know, of the fact that we live in a generation where every Jew is a Jew by choice. You have to choose your Judaism, and just like you have to choose your membership, you choose your institutions. What people will choose is not going to be dependent on what their parents did. It's not going to be dependent on you have to. It's going to be dependent on whether those institutions offer something that fits what the individual is interested in. The same thing has to do with collective identity, and in general, and Israel in particular. We can tell Jews, listen, we were a people for 3,000 years. Egypt comes before Sinai. I could give so many speeches on this issue that move me deeply. I'm convinced. I could convince myself very, very quickly. And I have a profound impact on myself when I speak. But just saying that that's what it was isn't going to do it. It's when we have a narrative of our collective identity that somebody wants to be a part of, that it becomes something that they might choose. Now, they may have a predilection to it, and we have to, and it's still there. So, but it's not going to sustain itself unless, Amir Hashem, there's a good amount of anti-Semitism, and then collective identity of Jewish life will be just fine. And for those of you who don't know me, I was being facetious, so please don't. It is my hope, and here this is my big leap of faith, and I can't argue that it's true. It really is a hope. My hope is that just as Jewish institutions will create expressions of meaning that people will want to join, and then, of course, collective identity is important, because look what I get here. Israel, this language of home, this interaction will be one that fulfills Jewish life with meaning, that fills Jewish life with meaning, that offers a value added. That Zionism is not something that speaks about your relationship to Israel, but Zionism speaks about your relationship to yourself as a Jew in Canada and in the United States. And it's part of who you are. And that when it has that narrative, it's, oh, look what that added to my life. It's not a burden, it's not an oi, it's not the question of what are the boundaries, could you it's what do you get? What do you get from Zionism? My colleague and friend Gil Troy wrote a really beautiful article at Times of Israel on this. I recommend everybody. You should all read it. And he just put out a new version of Arthur Hertzberg's The Zionist Idea. It's called The Zionist Ideas. It's it's required for every office, every rabbi, every teacher has to have this. It's just a phenomenal collection. But he has a beautiful article. What are you getting from Zionism? We have to he's wrote an article about how you reclaim the language, but it's not just, it's connected. How do we give it meaning again? And then my hope is that if it has meaning, it'll be something you choose. And then just like I can't tell somebody why get married or why be in a relationship. When you're in a relationship, it's meaningful. Oh, that's why you're in a relationship. I hope that through this, that Israel could be part of the solution for a potential diminishing of Jewish collective identity, instead of being the victim of that phenomenon.
So you touched on some of this in your talk, but I think there may be more to say about it. From Rabbi Michelle Massagier in Los Angeles, and she says, what do Israelis appreciate most about Jewish life in America? And what do Israelis feel we American Jews lack?
They don't appreciate anything about Jewish life in America. Let's be honest. Some. Do you know who appreciates Jewish life in America? Israelis who are shlichim, not the ones who come for a week or two on some trip. They appreciate it, they have a little story, but it doesn't really. The ones who spend a year or two or three, so-called helping you, are the ones who become enlightened. Mm-hmm. Those are the shinshinim from the Sochnut who spend a year, the various shlichim. Those are they have great potential, and part of this I engage of Israelis, of World Jewry, we have to look at who are the people who are already trained and who could be a really important offer a real serious contribution to Israeli society. But by and large, overall, Israelis, and that's what I said, they don't. Mm. That's the problem. They can't even see you. They don't see you. And right now, they're very happy, and Israelis, please remember, they're not Israelis as distinct. They're Jews now. This Israeli secularism and its radical is almost gone. Almost gone. Most Israeli Jews are very similar to the average conservative Reform Jew, Reconstructionist Jew in America. And even some of the nuns. The average. They do. They're much more observant. The observant conservative Reform Jews. Just like most Jews, they don't go to synagogue either. They might go even a little less, but synagogue is not an essential part. They do Jewish. They have Shabbos meals, the calendar, Hebrew culture. Israelis feel very, very good about their Jewishness right now. If there's anything that they respect about Jewish life, it's not Jewish life, it's about, some of them begrudgingly respect your loyalty. The fact that you've been there through thick and thin. But that's only, it's not strong enough. And now, you know, the post-Iran crisis, where Israelis were in one mindset and North American Jews were another, created a divide on that. So there isn't as much of a sense of your a taking for granted of your loyalty. But that would be the most. They don't think about you. They think about you in the sense that when you're in trouble. They don't see you as having a home that's beautiful. That maybe they want to copy some of the furniture, the designs. And that's also why they don't recognize their responsibility to create symbolic relationships with you too. The question was, what do they respect about Jewish life? It's not what they respect about Jewish bank accounts. That was that's a separate issue. And so part of what we need to change, Michelle, is we have to create a language in Israel which even enables them to understand that there's something to talk about. That there's something that that I could be Tukuma, but it doesn't mean I don't have something to learn from you. That's where we have to go, and it's going to take us a while, my friend.
So we're going to end this last question, which is actually a comment about somebody who is in advance kind of expecting to hear something, and let's see if in fact it came true. This is Jane Sobo, also from Los Angeles, and she says, just a comment. I look forward to hearing you effectively refute the notion that Israelis don't really care, or let alone think about world Jewry in their day-to-day lives. Have at it, though. Looking forward.
Jane, I get the last laugh. You thought I was predictable. I'm not predictable. What I am saying to you, though, is it is a little more nuanced. They do love you. They do feel loyal to you. They do care about you. But they care about you in the terms of the superiority of the Israeli existence over your existence. They care about you that if you're in trouble, they want to help you. They care about you that they're holding the door open for you. So they do care about you. But they don't really think about you in the sense that to think about someone is to see them, to hear the way they talk about themselves. My friends, we just have to change this. This is what the Hartman is. This is what my whole life is about. It's what all of our lives are about. That's why we go into this business. If anybody would say to us, "What really? You think you're going to change assimilation? What you think you're going to change this or the forces?" We're educators in the midst of a world where there's so many forces which are larger than us, and we say no. So here's the story. Let's start by recognizing it's not that they don't care, it's that the language of Zionism limits the conversation. What do we need to do? Let's fight for that home. Let's fight for that language of an extended, much richer family. Let's compete over who has the nicer one. And it's not that the best one will win, it's that we're all going to win, because all of our family will be enriched by recognizing that today we are commemorating the Holocaust. But thank God there were multiple rebirths, each one creating something powerful and exciting. And the sum total of that is what hopefully will give us a future, and hopefully a future together. It's really nice being with you.
Thank you, Donniel. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Our next and final webinar for this season will be coming actually from New York with Yossi Klein Halevi talking about his new book. So that's in a few weeks. And
great book, by the way. Great book. It's going to be, I believe, one of the most important books on Zionism. Outstanding book.
So there you go, as a good preview for it in about 3 weeks from New York. And we look forward to seeing you then. And again, continue to write and join us with your comments and conversation. That's what we do here. We listen, and then we don't really give all the answers, but we hopefully have a few and maybe some more questions for you. Again, thank you very much for being with us today. We'll see you again next time.
Bye-bye.